Welcome to the 8th video in this series of short videos I'm recording in honor of the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence and the release of my most recent book, American Democracy in Crisis. If you haven't had a chance to listen to the other videos, I invite you to do that because they do build on each other. As usual, I'm going to start with a quote and then say a few words about it. And the quote I'm starting with today is from a political scientist named V.O. Key. And he said the following about American government. He said, "For government to function, the obstructions of the constitutional mechanism must be overcome. And it is the party that casts a web over the dispersed organs of government and gives them some semblance of unity." This quote helps explain why, even though the framers of the U.S. Constitution described parties as evil and believed they were a threat to liberty, they ultimately turned to them as the only institution capable of bridging the divisions they themselves had built into the system. And as I mentioned in the previous videos, the reason why they built these divisions into the system was because the framers were so concerned about a majority faction taking control of this new free government and tyrannizing the minority. They agreed with Montesquieu that the only way to safeguard liberty was to put mechanisms in place that divided majority factions and frustrated their ability to tyrannize the minority. And this includes adopting mechanisms like separation of powers and checks and balances and federalism and so on. As a result, what they did, however, is they frustrated all majorities, not just tyrannical majorities, but all majorities. And this has been a problem since the founding. And one of the first, not the first, very first, but one of the first of our early founders turned public officials to figure this out and to try to address this problem was Alexander Hamilton. He recognized this problem in the context of his attempts to deal with the fiscal challenges as the new government was taking shape, and he wanted to pass legislation, and he was struggling to get it passed. And it was at that point that Hamilton became what Ron Chernow described as an unlikely flashpoint for the formation of the first parties. He unified his backers and supporters to create a loose coalition that would become known eventually as the Federalists. And in that process, he gave his opponents reasons and motive to themselves join together to unite against him and his eventual Federalist group. The opposition started in Congress and was led by another unlikely source, Alexander Hamilton's former co-author, friend, colleague, James Madison. And while Madison, as we have talked about, spoke out forcefully against the dangers of factions in Federalist 10 and elsewhere, he spent much of his early years in Congress organizing the anti-Federalists into what would eventually become Madison's party and what would later become known as the Democratic Republicans. And Hamilton was largely successful in persuading, bargaining, pushing through his agenda and passing his fiscal plan. And in so doing, uniting an opposition against him. And the united opposition became, by say, the early to mid 1790s, the first sort of fledgling example of what would ultimately become political parties in the United States. They weren't exactly the type we're familiar with today, but they were essentially the inkling of what was to become the political parties. And as critical as the development of the party apparatus was in those early years, and while they became known as something of a solution to the problem of division in the system, they are really only a semi-solution to the problem of division or the anti-majoritarianism built into the system. And I describe them as a semi-solution for several reasons, but I'll give you 3 examples. Number 1, yes, political parties do work to unite the first and second branches of government, the president or the Congress and the presidency, in periods in which those branches are both controlled by the same party, as they were, say, in Jefferson's time. There's no guarantee, however, that the first and second branches will be controlled by the same party. And while divided government was once a rarity in the United States, it has become much more common today. Between 1954 and 2002, 9 presidential and 14 midterm elections has resulted in divided government. And this is a huge increase in divided government from the period prior. So that's one reason why parties, as much as they can help move towards bridging the divisions, are not a full-fledged solution. Another example of why this isn't always effective, or why the parties themselves aren't always effective in bridging the divide, is because even when you have unified government, even when you have the same party in control of the presidency and the Congress, that does not guarantee that Congress and the president will work together in a concerted manner, in short, row the boat the same direction. And we have seen this time and time again, whether it was Jimmy Carter and his attempts to get the SALT II treaty passed, or more recently, whether it was somebody like Donald Trump, who came into office with Republicans in Congress promising to fulfill a campaign promise to repeal the Affordable Care Act, the quote-unquote Obamacare. He was unable to do that. So even when you have unified government, it doesn't guarantee that you're going to be able to row the boat in the same direction or move forward in a concerted manner to pass policy. And the last example I'll give you is because even again, when you have unified government, you have other divisions in government which make the problem of working together difficult. And just as an example, the framers adopted a bicameral system in Congress where we have a upper house in the Senate and a lower house in the House of Representatives. And even if they are of the same party, they are elected for different terms. They serve wildly different constituencies. There's a lot of differences between these two bodies. And unlike some of our European counterparts, they are equally powerful, and all legislation has to pass both of those bodies. And so that makes it very, very difficult to get things done, even in periods of united government, and even in periods when the House and the Senate are controlled by the same party. And so that is just to give you an example of why, despite what Vokey talks about, and despite the fact that political parties are something of a band-aid to the anti-majoritarian problem built into the structure of our system, parties are really only a semi or partial solution to the problem.